A little bit less than a week since Apple's event, which was held virtually but also in person in Shanghai, New York, and in London, where I was at their stunning Apple London headquarters at the old Battery Park Power Station, which has just been unbelievably renovated. And I think the thought that's gone into it is just absolutely what you would expect from Apple if you've been to any of their buildings. But moreover, it was, I think, an example of how important that place and that day was. Tim Cook started the event letting us know this was going to be an iPad event, and then went on to say it was the biggest day for iPad since the original iPad. Now, that's 14 years ago, that thing. And I got to tell you, it's a pretty phenomenal bit of kit. This thing is wild. And when you think about that we didn't have anything like this before that, we've come a long way. So, just how far have we come? Now, the standard iPad still exists. It's iterated, 10th generation out now. I think of the iPad mini as one of my favorite devices, but the iPad Air sits strangely in some ways in the middle. And Apple even said that the iPad Air is where technology that they pioneer in the iPad Pro comes down after generations to make it more affordable. So you've got a kind of mid-ground with the iPad Air. So you've got two iPad Airs, and I've got to be honest, there's not a lot to say about this other than their support for the brand new Apple Pencil Pro and this, the 13-inch model. Now, I think that stands out to a lot of people. Apple, strangely, went on the record and said that 50% or around half of iPad Pro sales are the larger version. And they obviously looked at it and went, why don't we do that for the other model iPad? And this is the iPad Air in 13-inch. And I've got to say, there is something absolutely gorgeous about having such a big screen. I think for travel, unbelievable when you think about things like watching streaming shows on Stan or Netflix or whatever you're doing. For creativity, out of this park. For content creation, pretty darn good. There's very little not to like about this because it's actually not ridiculously heavy. It's mildly heavier than the smaller one. It's really just a matter of can you afford it? It's a simple question of budget. My kids loved the bigger screen. They're creative. They're playing games on it. They're using it for drawing and Procreate and things like that. So there's a real benefit to that in that sense. I think the iPad Air in 13-inch will sell like hotcakes, ladies and gentlemen, because people that have never been able to afford the larger iPad Pro are now looking at this going, wow, I can get that bigger screen. So iPad Air, not a lot to say, not going to lie. It's better, it's faster, it's bigger. That's a good thing. But all the real hype is around, well, two things, Apple Pencil Pro and iPad Pro. iPad Pro here, this has a processor in it faster than most laptops you'll see today. Now, it's a very interesting delineation that's required around the chipset. M1, M2, M3, M4. At their base level, this is far better than the M3. I've read some reports that Apple's walking away from their M3 as a failed chip. But when you think about the more superior versions of the M3 or the more superior versions of the M2, Max, Ultra, Pro, whatever they want to call them, the M4 isn't meant to be better than those. It's meant to be better at that base level than the M1, M2, and M3. I kept getting told, and look, it may be the reality distortion field, it may be Apple's lines, but I kept getting told that the M3 chip was not capable of showing this screen. This is a dual layer OLED screen, and it is so because it's so thin. That's what they're able to do by getting two OLED panels and combining them together. But Apple say that the M3 processor simply couldn't drive the power required to make those two screens happen in tandem as they would have liked. The M4 thus was required. That's not to say that your computer with a better than M3 processor isn't way faster than this, because it is. But this on its own does some pretty amazing things. If I just show you some Geekbench results, for example, I ran it through the traditional Geekbench tests, and you get those results. And when I look at this here on the GPU, this device, 52,894 score. Now, the previous generation iPad Pro 11-inch, 45,000. That's pretty darn good. But let's go back to CPU benchmarks. And of course, this is pretty much Apple versus Apple, and that's totally fine. But this is a benchmark I did earlier today. Single core 3696, which compares to the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max at around 2.9 or 2.8. Remember, they're running the A17 Pro. To find something with an M chip, the previous iPad Pro with the M2, 2,534. Now, when we duck over to multi-core scores, it's unbelievably wild. 14,370 compared to the previous iPad Pro with M2 at 9,622. That was always going to be the case. Your Geekbench, your benchmarking is always going to be out of this world. Now, there's a couple of things they demonstrated here at the launch and in briefings that I've been to that are actually really hard to demonstrate because the apps aren't available yet, all those kind of reasons. So for example, Final Cut. I've been running that. I made a video on it the other day. And look, it's phenomenal. It's unbelievable what you can do on an iPad. Let's keep it real simple at that. Like if I have a look at Final Cut and I just made a really simple video before, but this kind of really simple timeline editing with an iPad, I've tried this before, but never really felt it even come close to the desktop experience. My only problem making this video on the iPad was just finding all the buttons and knowing everything was because I'm not a Final Cut user. That's a different problem. But you know, importing this 4K video, exporting it, clipping it, just totally fine. But music-wise, this is where it gets like mind-blowing. Now I'm going to share something with you now that that I'm not going to play in great volume, let me be clear, okay? But hopefully be able to get the sense of it. When I was in year 12, so 30 odd years ago, me and a few mates, Ism, Mick, we had just a kicking around band, you know, busking and whatnot. And Mick Sloggett, unbelievable songwriter. Ism, unbelievable guitar player. We just mucked around a bit, right? Mick would write a song, I'd sing it, whatever. And we had these recorded on cassettes. Now, the thing is, and I'm just going to try and remember how to use all this now, but this is Logic Pro, which is a music editing software. The thing is, like, it was a cassette recording from 30 years ago, which I at some point imported into software and run it as an MP3. So, keyboards, and there's a bit of guitar, a bass guitar, and this idiot singing, right? Now, you can play the levels here, that's great, but here's what happened here. And apparently this is possible on computers before, but this is an iPad, right? You drop this file in and you put it through some sort of stem processing, right? And it splits out this one MP3 file. It splits it out into vocals, guitars, and other. Now, it can also pick up drums, but there was no drums in it, which means if I was to be so bold, I could listen to just the vocals of this track. There is no music playing except the vocals. Are you kidding me? That's the vocals only from a thing that was recorded on, I think maybe 2 microphones into a cassette deck. If we want to mute the vocals and play just the bass guitar, and this is wild because Ism would never have heard this before, just him playing. But just the bass guitar, right? You can't hear it, but it's just the bass guitar. Now, all I can tell you is when I listen to the other track, because it can't isolate keyboards, doesn't have a kind of section for that. When I play it, I can barely hear I can hear a muffled version of the voice. But to me, that is unbelievable. Now, that's all to do with the neural chip within the M4 processor. This is happening on an iPad, folks. Now, I think it's going to be very hard for anyone to really quantify the power of the M4 processor on this device because I think I would describe it as cart before the horse. I don't know which is meant to be which there, chicken or egg style, but I assume you build the cart before you own a horse or you have a horse to pull it. In this case, they've built the iPad before the software's been built. And the other example of that is things like Procreate and others, which I'll show you in a second with the pencil. It's able to do amazing things, but doesn't really do them yet because the software has to be released and updated. Unbelievable performance from something that is 5.1 millimeters. Are you kidding me? Now, I should say it's 5.1 plus the camera bump. Just to be clear, the camera bump's not included. But let's talk Apple Pencil Pro. Now, remember, the Apple Pencil Pro is also compatible with the iPad Air, the new iPad Air. So Apple Pencil Pro, compatible with iPad Pro and iPad Air in this new generation. Now, I'll just use Notes really as the best example of this. And the number one thing is to bring up the pencil selector here, you can now just squeeze the control, squeeze the top of the pencil, and you'll see it appears there. Okay, so now I can flick through things and choose a pen or a tip, whatever you want to call it, and the different settings there. Now, I don't even think that I might just choose one more. So click and choose that guy. We'll go to the big guy. So yeah, look at that. Now, I don't even think that you'll be able to see the best part of this. But if I put my pencil down here, right? Now, can you see underneath there a shadow? That's not a shadow from the lights in my studio here. Let me rest it on. I'm resting it on here. That's a virtual shadow. They've created a virtual shadow for the pencil. That's wild. But it's barrel roll, I think they call it, which is the real thing. Look at this, see? Now, there's not really many other apps I can demonstrate this, but the whole idea is there, if you were doing some sort of drawing and you needed the brush to be thick and thin and you wanted to, really, work with the brush in a, artistic way, which I am not, then you have that capability without having to switch between brushes. Again, something I think that they will iterate and that app developers will go crazy with. And there's a little bit of haptic feedback, and it's so subtle when you squeeze the tip. There's just a little haptic feedback to get you going. That hover function makes it really easy to place where you're about to do whatever it is you're going to do. And of course, all of that will be updated through Procreate and other apps as time goes on. The screen is phenomenal. It really is. I don't even think there's a great way of demonstrating that to you. There are, there's just so many, just the detail in it, the blacks, the brightness, the contrast between the images in dark and light. When I look at a picture with a bit of dark in it, or what, like this, it's beautiful. There is unquestionably not a better iPad screen on the market. Now, is it better than an AMOLED or an OLED that other companies might have done? Yes, because it's this tandem OLED, these two OLEDs pushed together so that one pixel, if required, can push its brightness out at peak 1600 nits peak brightness. It's quite phenomenal to think about how great this screen is. And again, it's 5.1 millimeters. I do think this is the biggest leap forward for iPad in a very long time. It really is. It's a great device. I can see people with that original large iPad Pro upgrading. It's expensive, right? It starts at $16.99. You could spend $4,500 Australian dollars on this thing if you wanted to really spec it up. But I've been using it. I've got a MacBook Pro with a better chip than this. And I've been using this in laptop mode, shall we call it? Whoop. You'll see it there for some time. Now, big difference, Apple keyboard, harder to tell the difference, but this side here is an oval instead of a circle on that hinge. That's the only really obvious way of telling the difference, other than the fact that you've got this much larger and more natural feeling trackpad here. It's interesting, in all my days so far of using this essentially as a laptop, I've actually not used the mouse much at all, because your head says it's an iPad, you can touch the screen. Whereas with a touchscreen laptop, often you don't think about that. So I think, I said to someone this morning, I think adjusting to this as your primary device is like switching from Android to iPhone or iPhone to Android. It takes time. You're going to need to spend, I think, 2 to 3 weeks to really get used to using it as your primary device. I've watched content on it, I've made content on it, I've mucked around with music, I've drawn things, my kids have drawn things, and we've played this really cool playing game, which I'm a little bit addicted to, and it's really not that complex. It has nothing to do with the new iPad Pro, but it just feels good to play it with the Apple Pencil at the same time. But sometimes when you're on a plane and you're trying to entertain yourself because it's a long flight, sometimes you just need a fun game like this, right? Anyway, unbelievable device. Genuinely high performance, unlike anything we've seen before from Apple. And I think expensive, no doubt, but it's not for everyone. This is not a companion device for everyone. This is a replacement device for a lot of people. And let me be clear, at $599, the standard, entry-level, 10th generation iPad is unbelievable. It's great. For what 99.9% of people are doing on their iPads, just get the entry level. But for those people that want to move their content creation to a more portable solution, that do want to take advantage of these high performance tools, we're going to see some really cool stuff land here. I remember 10 years ago doing a segment on the Today Show, which was something along the lines of the gadgets Steve Jobs, or the things the iPhone can do that Steve Jobs would never have imagined. It was like controlling a pot plant's watering schedule, opening a door, turning on a light, ordering an Uber, all that stuff these days. I think there'll be things in the next little while, next year or three, that the iPad will be able to do that Apple didn't think was on their radar, because they've built such a beast under the hood and it's entirely portable. You put it in this case, it's way thicker than double its actual weight and thickness. I love it like this, but I feel really weird carrying it around just like that with a folio on it. Not so bad, but in the end, you always end up wishing that you had the keyboard. So while it's expensive, the Magic Keyboard is an absolute cracker. And there's going to be some great alternatives out there. There always are. Third-party companies like Logitech coming out with great, I believe they've already announced a great keyboard for it as well. There'll be plenty of options. I think the iPad Pro kicks it out of the park, and I think the iPad Air is probably going to be the device with the biggest sales growth in 2024 in terms of Apple iPad. Let us know what you think. Like, subscribe, smash that button, all those things. Hit us in the comments and let us know. We'll have a chat about it. The iPad Pro and all the iPad range for 2024. Details, EFTM.com.